Hey guys, it's Matt, welcome to SpeedTutor, and today we're going to be looking at adding audio and all the different ways that we can add audio effects to our game. Whether that be adding a 2D or a 3D sound, whether that be having a 3D sound and affecting that over time, being able to control how we should and when we should play our audio source, be able to choose an audio clip and when to play it, to be able to affect a sound on a trigger, on an event, or to be able to affect UI buttons. We'll also look at stopping sounds or checking to see if sounds are playing, so you can use that in your code to make decisions when you will need to play or stop sounds. And then we'll look at AudioMixers to be able to control bunches of sounds together, and we will go through all that today, and I will put all the little annotations in the timeline for you to check them out. So be sure to let me know what you think and if you have any other tips for users in the future. So I'm going to add elements of sound to this game because it's silent at the moment, and that doesn't sound realistic. I always say to everybody that when you're making a game or any environment, go out or look for reference to see what sounds you can hear in any given moment. So if you're sat in your house at any one time, can you hear the sound of your computer, your fridge, a fan, the outside? Can you hear some wind, trees, birds, anything like that? And the more you add, the more creative and believable your scene can be. So if we grab any sound that we've got and we can drag it and drop it into our hierarchy, and it will create an audio source for us. Remember that an audio should be a .wav file or similar, and you can check the Unity documentation because that means it will loop correctly, whereas other compressed file formats like MP3 don't loop as well. Now we'll go through the audio source basically here, and you can see that the audio clip is my general breathing. I've got an output which is the AudioMixer, which we will go through. We've got some bypass effects that we don't need to be concerned with, but you can look at the Unity documentation if that's what you want. You can look at the play on awake, means that the sound will start as soon as the game plays. I'll also make sure that I take a loop, so it always keeps repeating no matter what happens. You just need to make sure that your audio track does loop. You look at the priority, which is usually to be kept at 128. You can look at the volume, and this can be adjusted between 0 and 1. The pitch, usually left at 1 unless you specifically want to adjust a pitch to make it lower or higher. You can look at the stereo pan to which side of left or right of your ears the sound effect would come out of more, whereas 0 is just by default. You've got the spatial blend, which is either 2D or 3D, and 2D is the sound will be heard from no matter where it exists in your scene, it will be heard the same no matter where you are or wherever that position of the audio may be. Whereas if you put it all the way to 3D, it will attenuate over a distance, and say we put our audio effect over in the mountains and we'd attenuate the distance to not far away from there. Only when we're close do we hear it. But for this breathing sound effect, I want it to be 2D because it's going to be really near our character. We'd be able to hear that because when we breathe out, we can hear that. And then the 3D settings are appropriate if you've got a 3D sound. So in this case, I've got loop, play on awake, and spatial blend. I'm going to just turn the volume down slightly just for this current audio effect, and you can drag as many as you want into your hierarchy. And when we press play, you'll be able to hear it. And you could hear that sound effect in that little test there. As I said about making more and more overlaps with the sound that you use, I've got a wind loop, and we can add that in exactly the same way. So we can just add another audio effect, which can just be dragged and dropped into our hierarchy. And again, we can play on awake, we can press loop, we can have it as a 2D sound because it will just be in our entire environment. And we might want to turn that down to 0.52. And as you can hear in the background, you can hear the sound of the wind and the breathing together as one. Now, we've got another example of how do we add a 3D sound effect. So you can see over in this side here, I had some crows that spawn and move around. I'll just activate my gizmos so they spawn in this dark blue box here. And now we want the crows to make a sound effect that when we walk near them, we'll be able to hear them, but when we walk away, we won't. Like when we're over in the other direction, we don't want to be able to hear them, so we don't want it to be a 2D effect. I can just drag the crow mix into my hierarchy. So I just moved my audio source and positioned it roughly where I expect the crows to be. And I wanted to be able to hear it when I'm on the bridge, so you can set this to a spatial blend 2D sound. We can keep it play on awake and loop. we can now have access to the 3D sounds, and I don't really like the Doppler effect. It changes the sound of the pitch based on the velocity of the movement of the character, so I usually like to set that at 0, so then when we move it doesn't get a weird distortion, but you can test that out for yourself. You can have different types of roll-off, a logarithmic, linear, or custom. Logarithmic, you can see that it will attenuate over time and fade into the distance, but you will always be able to hear it unless you get very, very far away. But in my case, I like to use a linear roll-off, so if you get out of the boundary of the actual audio source that we're going to have, then you won't be able to hear it. So what I usually like to do is set the max distance all the way down until we can see the actual bounding sphere, which is just on the edge, if you can see it here, just there. So I'm going to set the max distance to about 100, and then I'll set the min distance to about half of that value, so we attenuate between those two distances. And then you can adjust between the min and max volumes, and I do actually have a tutorial on looking at 3D sounds and explaining the differences between the different variations that you have, but this is something that you can test out for yourself. The thing is, we've got some audio effects that we've added ambient sounds and things like that, but now how would we play an audio source or play an effect that we might have that we want to play at any given time? So say I add another one, which is tumbling rocks here. And I don't want that to play on a wake or loop. I want to play that only when I tell it to do that. Now, how would we go about doing it? It's going to be a 2D sound, so I will go create, C#, and I'm just going to call this playing audio source. So we're going to create a bunch of different scripts to do different things. We'll open up a Visual Studio. Now what we can do is get rid of the two starting methods. And in this case, we can write square brackets serialize field, and then we'll write private audio source, and then we'll call this as my audio source. And from there, underneath here, we can write maybe an update method so we can do an input. So when we press E, it's going to do it, but it'll be the same whatever you choose to do. So we'll just say void update, create if input.getKey down, open brackets in quote is key code.e, for instance. Then under here, this is our line of code which control playing the audio source. We'll say my audio source dot play with two brackets and a semicolon, and it'll just play the method which is in the audio source functionality. So when we press E, we will play the audio source that we specify. So what we can do is go back into Unity now. We'll create an empty game object, and we'll just call this game object our audio controller. Then we can add our playing audio source script. It'll need an audio source, so we're going to have tumbling rocks. So I'm just going to mute the audios that we have, or get rid of them for now while we test this. And now when we press the E button, you'll be able to hear the tumbling rocks that activated exactly when we wanted it to. Now you know how to play an actual audio source with just one audio clip on it. How do we specifically play with this audio source? It might control all our effects we want to play. How do we play a different sound effect on that audio source? So then we can maybe minimize how many audio sources. We might have 1 million. So in this case, we'll say create another C# script and name this play specific audio. We'll open up in Visual Studio again. And then in this case, we can copy exactly what we had for our previous script, which for playing an audio source, and we can just paste that into what we have here, because we're going to base it on that. We still need our audio source because we need to reference what that will be. We can under here have another serialized field, call that private AudioClip this time as the audio clip that we're going to choose to change it to, and this can be my AudioClip 1 as an example. And then what you could write under here as well is you need to give another parameter to this, is the volume. So we can say private float volume, set that equal to 1.0f with a semicolon. Now in this case, we can get rid of the line that we had when we pressed E, and we can say that my audio source dot play one shot, because that will play the audio that we want to play just once, and in brackets is my audio clip 1, so the variable that we created, and then we can have a comma of our volume and then add a semicolon. So now we will play on the audio source the clip that we wanted just once with play one shot, because play one shot allows us to specify an audio clip and then specify the volume. So we can go back to our audio controller. You can add the play specific audio script. I'm just going to disable my old one, and you can see we need an audio source. So in this case, I can add the tumbling rocks again. We can keep the volume at 1, and I might want a different audio clip. So in this case, I'll just add an alarm sound effect into there. So that's going to be what's playing, but I'm going to turn the volume down because it'll probably be a loud sound effect. So I'll put it at 0.2. Then we're going to press play. So when we press E at this instance, we had the tumbling rock audio source which had that effect, but we expect to hear the alarm, which we did in this case. So it's working perfectly and as we wanted. And don't forget that you can get all these scripts and this project without the 3D assets on my Patreon, and I will upload it all so you can get access to all these ways to use your sound effects in one go. We might want to play an audio source on a trigger event. So when we walk into a particular area, like say we walk into the very beginning of the bridge here, we might want the little tumbling rock audio sound. We could again create a new script and call this play audio on trigger. Now, when you're playing something on trigger, you could play it in the same way with an audio clip, or you could play it by just playing the audio source, but maybe in this case we just want to play the audio source. So I'll just grab from that other script that we had, which was just playing an audio source by itself, which is fairly simple. I'll copy it to use it in a little bit. So now we can say in this method here, we're going to need to create a trigger event method. So we can go void on trigger enter, and then when I press double tab, it will complete it for me. So we have collider other, because it'll look for a collider, and we'll just give it a name of other. If you wanted 2D, you can just name that on trigger enter 2D collider 2D, just like so, and that would work in a 2D game. But if we've got a 3D game, we can have it like this. Now we can say that if other.compare tag and the player is going to walk into our trigger event, we can just have a tag of player as long as your player is tagged that. Then we can do our variable, which was up here, which was going to be our audio source. So remember that we needed this private variable to reference it. So that can be there. And then we needed the line of code to be able to play. So we can just copy that straight in here. So whenever we walk into the trigger event, you'll be able to play the sound effect. So we'll go and test that out. Now I'm going to go game object, 3D object, and create a cube. Just going to drag my cube up onto the top here. I'm going to put it at the very start of my bridge, just here. And I'm just going to scale this out so we'll definitely walk through it. We need to make sure that it has a box collider. We set it to its trigger. On our player, we need to make sure that it's tag player in our case, and you may need to add the tag if it doesn't already. We can rename this our audio trigger, and we can add the play audio on trigger, so we can add that to the box. We'll look for the audio source that we want to play, which is the tumbling rocks, and we should be ready to go, so we can press play. And as you can see, when I walk through the actual object here, you can see that the sound effect played when we walked through it. And of course, you can maybe disable this object if you want the sound effect to play once, or play it every time that you do it. And of course, like I said, you could change this trigger event for it to be one which you can play a specific audio, or you could play, like we've done here, just the audio source itself. We could do something similar to this, and we can actually create an event so we can play as many different sound effects as we want without specifying in script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just comment out what we have here. And at the top, we can keep this script, which is our trigger, but we're going to use using UnityEngine.events. And now in our trigger event, now we can create a new variable and call this square bracket serialized field private Unity event, and call this my audio event, something like that with a semicolon. Now in our trigger event, we can say my audio event.invoke, which will activate the event system, so we'll be able to access that and do different things upon multiple objects. So we can now minimize this, and this is still a triggered event that when we walk into it, it'll do something, but now we have access to an actual Unity event. So we can add, when we walk into this, we could literally add 3 different effects. It doesn't have to be audio, this could be anything. We could add some particles and stuff without actually specifying in script, exactly creating variables and doing everything like this. So this could be added to loads of different objects and make it easier. Now, how do we activate a sound effect? Just like we just did almost. With that event, with at least one event on, we can drag the game object, which is the sound effect tumbling rocks, to the slot. It'll ask us to select a function. So we can go audio source and we can just choose play. So in this case, when we walk into the trigger, we will play the audio. And of course we could play another, just like by adding another, or do different things from there. So this is another way that you could do it. And I won't test it out because it's very, very similar. Another thing I will show you is how to do this with UIs and buttons and things like that. Now, if we right click, go UI, and we'll create just a button, and it will create a canvas for us. Now on a button, it has a Unity event, and it has an on-click event, and we can do it in exactly the same way. So we can add a plus, choose a game object. So let's say, for instance, we could have the tumbling rocks again. And again, you could say AudioSource and play. Every time you click, it will play the tumbling rock sound effect, which is great if that's what you want your game to do. But say you want that when your cursor enters that button, you want a sound effect. Rather than when you click, you can add a component and choose event trigger if you type that in, and then you can add a new event type, which will be pointer enter, exit, pointer down. So you can say pointer enter. So every time your pointer enters the button, which might be on screen, we can then play a sound effect just in exactly the same way. Now you might ask me, how do we actually stop a piece of audio or an audio source that might be playing? Well, all we actually need to do is just select my audio source and just press .stop. So that will, even if we're playing a piece of audio and we put stop, it'll just stop it as soon as it started, really. So in this case, we press E to play a sound effect, but we might want to check if the audio source has finished playing its previous audio. So we can write an if statement, and we can say if, and then if we put an exclamation mark, we can say my audio source is playing, and then under here we can encapsulate that statement in curly brackets again. And we can say that if my audio source is playing, and the exclamation mark at the beginning means if it's false, so if it isn't playing anything, then we can play this clip. We could say that in this case, if it's anything else, so else, if it was playing an audio clip, we can say my audio source .stop. So we're just checking different scenarios. Of course, we could do it the other way around, so we could just take the exclamation mark. So now we're saying if my audio source, so if we are playing a sound effect, maybe we want to overwrite that and play a different one, so we can play this line of code. But it's entirely up to you. I'm just showing you different instances of how you can control with stop, with checking it if it's playing. You can actually use things like .pause too, which instead of stopping it, which would stop it and make you have to restart it from the beginning, if you paused and then resumed at some later point with .play, it would resume from where you actually paused the audio from. So there are two slight differences. And there is other things where you can do an audio source play delayed, so you can wait an amount of time before you play the audio effect, which is similar, which is my audio source .play delayed, and you could specify that you want to delay it for 3 seconds before you play the next sound effect. It's exactly like AudioSource.play. It doesn't play a specific audio effect, it will just delay the playing of the audio source. Now, from here, we've just gone over the basics of being able to control it with different scripts, be able to control it with different effects, add our things to it. Now, we may want to add an audio mixer to control bunches or groups of sound effects, so we can edit that in a settings menu or something like that. Now, what we can do is, in our project panel, we can right click, create, and we can choose Audio Mixer. And I'm just going to call this our game audio mixer. I'm going to double click that and open it out, and we can just dock it just down here. You can see it here, and you can see that we have a mixer, and you can have more mixers if you want, snapshots, groups, and views. Groups are the things which we would group game objects together. Master means that every single object in the world is affected by this master. Now, what we can do is we can press the little plus, and you will see that we will get a child of the master. So in this case, this could be our ambient sounds. So in this case, the master would affect all sounds, but the ambient may be well just affect only ambient sounds, and then we could maybe have another which we call music, and the music is what we affect, and we're just going to make sure we parent this to the master as well. So the master affects both of these collectively. If music was a child of ambient sounds would also affect music, and that's not really what we want. So in this case, we can set these two things. So now, let's say we've activated all our bunches of audio here. in our scene and we say that wind loop, that we can look at its output and we can put the output as we may want to set that to ambient sounds. So ambient sounds is the audio mix for that. Crow can be ambient sounds too. As an example, the tumbling rocks could be our music sample. And I won't full screen this so you can see. So here you can hear that you need to specify to be able to edit in play mode that when you're on it. So when we turn the master down, everything will go down at once to nothing. And then in our other instance, we've got ambient sounds, which we can take all the way down and will only affect our ambient sounds. And then if we turn music all the way down, the sound of the rocks will disappear too. So this is how we can adjust. And you've got to remember that when you untick play mode, in this instance, it will remember your changes unlike the rest of Unity. So you might ask me, then how do we actually change this volume at runtime or in script? So then you can select, say, ambient sounds here, look at one of the properties, which is the attenuation of the volume. We can right click that and say, expose the volume of ambient sounds to scripts. So we're going to be able to access that. So we'll click that button and you can see that now we have an arrow to say that it's exposed. Now we can see that we've got exposed parameters down here in our AudioMixer options. We can click that drop down and we can see we've got my exposed param of the volume of ambient sounds. We can change this by double clicking it and we can rename this to ambient volume. Now we could create a new script, which we could go create C# and we can just say this AudioMixer ambient volume as just an example script. We can open that in Visual Studio. We can get rid of the starting methods, but up here we need to use namespaces to access the actual audio mixer. So we say using Unity engine.audio. Then we need to create a reference to our audio mixer. So we'll have square bracket serialized field, private audio mixer. And then have this as type of my audio mixer as an example. And then under here, we could have something which is just another update method. And then we'll say if input.get key down keycode.e again, and then we can say that our my audio mixer dot set float, and open brackets we can specify a name here, and then our name can be our name that we'd set. So it was going to be ambient volume, and then we need to specify a float. And remember, in an audio mix you can see that it goes from +20 to -80 because it's in a range of decibels, not actually the attenuation normally for just the basis of this. So what we can do is go back into our script, we can create a new variable and say private float, and we can just call this ambient volume. So we can use another attribute for our variable, which is called range. So in square brackets, if you put range, you put open brackets, and you can set your min and max values. So my minimum value will be 80, my maximum will be 20. So if we do that, we'll go from 80 to 20, and I will set my normal volume to 0 because that will be just it at normal volume. And now we can specify our ambient volume with a semicolon on the end of this. So now we can minimize this, go to the audio controller, and if we add our audio mixer volume to that, I'll just get rid of my other script. You can see that I'm looking for an audio mixer, so we can add our game audio mixer. And you can see that the ambient volume is currently at 0. We can go all the way to -80 or all the way to +20. And that's the only way that our slider can actually go in the inspector. So we can actually somehow break the sliders that we have. And we might just set it to -41.3 just for the sake of this. So now when we press play and we press E, we expect it to adjust the ambient slider how we would like it. So when we press E, you saw that our ambient went all the way down to -41 on our attenuation, the audio mixer. So I hope you liked all these tips that I showed you to add audio effects to your game. Let me know in the description if you've got any help, any tips, any ways to make this better, anything that you've got to share with the community, and I will add this to my Patreon, which is all the separate scripts, the entire project. But what a feature these 3D assets, it will feature everything that you can get hold of and be able to use in your own games from the get-go. So be sure to come and join my Discord if you want to chat. Come and check out my great assets on the Unity store. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Cheers.